No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, welcome to a brand new year. Holidays are behind us now, and we are kind of back in the swing of things.
Yeah, Happy New Year, man. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to this year. A lot of cool things on the horizon, and with the new year, some new strategies and some new conversations and some new relevant topics.
Absolutely agree. On this episode of Hacking Your Leadership, I want to kind of bring it back to the basics of something that we've discussed in the past. It's been a few years since we had an entire episode on it. And we've kind of touched on it here and there. We talk about the importance of it, but it's something that I think as we start out the new year, something that a lot of people struggle with, and something that a lot of people still do in their minds, and that is they put this hierarchy of leadership above management. You start out as a manager and you graduate to a leader. You start out as someone who's able to manage people and you evolve into someone who's able to lead people. And every time I hear someone referencing that, or I see a meme that implies that one is better than the other, it makes me cringe a little bit, because I think that it's backwards thinking. I understand how we got there. I understand why we had to push the pendulum in that direction as a whole in order to really increase the value of leadership, because leadership and management are different. I'm not saying they're the same thing. They're very different, but one is not better than the other, and they are both absolutely necessary if you have people whose success and growth are in your charge. If they report to you, you definitely have to be a leader to them and a manager to them, and you don't stop doing one to be the other.
I mean, I would even take it to the larger extreme where you talked about like evolving from manager to leader. I think right now in a lot of the public discourse around the conversation, it's manager bad, leader good. Like It's not even an evolution. It's completely separate with like these titles of one is bad and one is good. And I know we've talked about it before, and we've discussed it before. But yeah, I think that it doesn't do justice. It kind of works in this mindset of if you're not doing things well as somebody who is in charge of people, then that makes you a bad manager. And if you're doing things well, then you're a good leader. And I just think that it doesn't work that way. And
right.
And I know we'll probably go into a little bit of the specificity of that, but I agree with you that I think it's something that we have to constantly talk about, remind ourselves about, and make sure that we are giving a fair and clear definition of the terms and maybe how they relate to one another, but stop thinking that if you're a manager, that's a bad thing, or if you manage people, it's a bad thing. It doesn't have to be.
Right, I agree. I think, and I'm guilty of this too. I started thinking that there was a difference in that you manage. I used to say that you manage processes and you lead people, because people don't like to be managed. And in general, I agree with that phrase. People don't like to be managed. But, my children don't like to be told what to do, but I do anyway, because it's my responsibility to make sure they're doing what needs to be done. And in hindsight, the things that they do that they didn't want to do ultimately serve them better in the long run. And so am I managing them by doing that? Yeah, absolutely. So yes, people don't like to be managed, but it doesn't mean that people don't need to be managed. And if you just think about it in terms of managing processes and leading people, the only way that works is if it's in the context of saying that being able to manage things, people, processes in general is a component of a good leader. And that there are people out there who are good at managing processes who are not great at leading people. That's fine, but that means they don't have people reporting up to them. I'm talking specifically about people who have employees reporting to them directly. And you don't get out of being a manager just because you are now a leader, you consider yourself a leader. In fact, I'll even say that in the push in the Western workforce for soft skills, which I don't like that term either, of empathy and humility and, kind of connecting with people on a deeper level. I think there are a lot of people out there who have become so good at doing those things and whose ability to manage people and manage processes have fallen by the wayside. Those are the skills that they are lacking now, when it used to be completely the opposite maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that even some people like to be managed.
Oh, yeah.
Like even that alone, you know what I'm saying? So like, it's not about, people don't like to be managed. I think people don't like the idea of micromanaging. Like they don't like somebody over their shoulder all the time, things like that. But I think the benefits of kind of being managed, it can be very, very clear expectations with very, limited kind of gray area. But like you go, you do the job, you do good work, and you go home. And that makes it kind of easy and clear, and you don't have to put a whole lot of extra maybe mental thought into everything. But I think that, to your point, it requires good leaders. We talk a lot about good leaders. Like it's both. You have to be comfortable managing projects, managing people, managing process. You have to be comfortable bringing people together, to have an agenda, to be like, here's the agenda items, here's kind of the expectations, here's what we're doing, and that's management. Like you're managing the getting something done. I think the leadership part of it is that how do you make people feel in that moment or in that conversation or in that dialogue? Do you just bring them together in a room and say, here's what we're going over today, here's the expectations, is everybody clear? Yes, great, have a good day, bye. I think a good leader will come and say, here's the agenda, here's the expectations. What are some of your thoughts on this? What are some things that you think can help us achieve this? How do you, like including them in the dialogue, making it more collaborative, taking in their opinions. Again, on the surface, the agenda could be the same, the office space could be the same, the kickoff could be the same, but how you go about managing the thing that you're working on is a big part in how people feel about it. And then I think that becomes then what people describe as leadership or a good leader versus a bad leader. Maybe a bad leader is somebody who is a nice person, but is not actually good at managing the project appropriately. There's no agenda. It's too willy-nilly. There's no that's bad management. But then they say, well, that's a bad leader. Well, okay. But I think that's where some of this messiness comes from.
Right. A leader that we've both had a lot of experience with, someone that we both hold in high regard, Gil Dennis, who's been one of the guests on the show earlier this year. You should check it out if you have not listened to it yet. His interview is just absolutely fantastic. One of the things that he has always said when it comes to the differences between managing and leading is he says that managing is doing things right, leading is doing the right things. And both are absolutely necessary. You can do the right things in a very wrong way and end up with poor results. You can do things the right way, but if they're the wrong things to do in general, if you're just kind of like following orders or doing what is told to you to do instead of kind of thinking outside the box about how that particular set of rules or policies or procedures impacts the outcome, like looking at what is the outcome you want to get to, not just I need to follow this thing, whatever it is. If you're just doing one or the other, you're going to end up with poor results. Even if you think you won't, even if you have managed to get through a number of situations like that without poor results, and you think that, okay, as long as I follow this process or this procedure, then I'm going to do okay. It's like, no, a subject matter expert can follow a process or a procedure. How the implementation of that impacts your people is just as important as considering, the importance of following it to begin with. And, I think that they're different things, and it's not semantics to say that you have to do right things and do things right.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's it's such a good topic, especially like as you were talking, I'm thinking about just leader development and clarifying definitions and having the conversation. Because again, I think that if we don't talk about this, then people are going to live in their own assumptions, or they're going to buy into this idea of, manager bad, leader good type of thing. And I think that that's not a healthy space, because then you mentioned this earlier, then you have a bunch of people that believe that when they get the responsibility of leading people in a manager type role, that their job is simply to talk, about vision and to make people feel good about the work or what's going on or connect with them. But if you're also not mixing in job expectations, if you're also not, spending the time to ideate and solve for opportunities within your business, or even with that person, like if you're not layering in elements of accountability, whether that's helping them to become better at self-accountability and or asking them for commitments and following up on those commitments. Like if you're not doing these things that are managerial-ish in behavior, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. And I think what ends up happening sometimes is, and I've seen this myself, where you'll have a team and a leader, and the team itself is maybe high performing, high functioning. They do a really, really good job at managing themselves. They do a really good job of like holding themselves accountable, of doing what they're going to go do. Like they're at that level. And then the leader gets like the accolades of like, man, you've led this team and the performance is so great and they've done such amazing work. And then you take that leader and you put them in another place, or you elevate them in a role, and then they fail. And they fail because that team was doing that work for themselves. That leader was associating that work with their ability to lead or their influence in leadership, and then they go to another team that doesn't have that level of high performance or that continuity or that alignment, and then they struggle because they don't know how to manage. And I think that that's something that, we talk so much about what it takes to be a leader today, and empathy and connection, and these are all things that are so important if you're going to create trust and loyalty and connection with your people. But if you don't know how to manage things, it's gonna be short-lived.
Yeah, I have real world experience with that. I was many years ago in my early 20s. I was part of a team of assistant managers at a Best Buy, and our general manager didn't really know a lot about what each of us was doing. My general manager didn't really know how to do the job of any of us, but he was a great motivator and a great supporter and a great leader from a standpoint of, kind of not micromanaging. He couldn't micromanage because he didn't know how to do the job to begin with, and he knew that. And that was a very good situation, because myself and all of my peers were really good at what we were doing in terms of the individual responsibilities that we had, and we delivered great results as a team. And he never failed to give us the accolades we deserved. He never said that it was on him that he did this all. He always let it roll downhill to the team. Really, really great leader from that standpoint. And then because of those successes, he was promoted into something bigger, running a team that needed a lot of work. And he didn't do very well running that team because he didn't know enough about what they were doing in order to kind of make sure they were doing things the right way. And when they weren't doing things the right way, he didn't really know how to fix that. He didn't know how to go in and make sure that things were being done the right way. All he knew how to do was kind of be like the visionary part, and he did those things very, very well. So if you want to compare the two, was he a great leader? Yes. If you think leadership and management are two different things, yes. But he was not a great manager. He didn't know how to do those things. And it worked out well for him when he had a team of people who knew exactly what they were doing and who executed well. When he didn't have those kind of people reporting to him, it didn't work out well for him. And so you don't have to necessarily be able to do the job of the people reporting to you as well as they can, but you need to know enough about it to be able to hold them accountable to the work they're supposed to be doing. And sometimes if you're talking about moving up within an organization, you naturally go through that because you maybe you did that work before you got promoted. But in a lot of organizations, there's a good mix of people who promote from within versus people being brought in from the outside. And if you're new to an organization and you're going into a new organization in a leadership role, there's going to be some effort you have to put in to be able to make sure you know how to manage the people reporting to you from a process standpoint, that they're doing the right things that they're getting things done, and not just say, well, the scorecard looks good, I guess they're doing well, I'm gonna leave them be. You need to go in and ask them what they're doing in order to be this successful. You need to follow up with them and in a way that doesn't make them think like you're trying to be critical of what they're doing, because if they're doing well, they're doing well. But you need to learn how to do their job, at least to the standpoint of thinking to yourself, okay, if my next role is having people who don't know how to do this very well and I need to hold them accountable, am I going to have the ability to do that? And if you don't, you're really playing with fire in that, kind of assuming that your leadership skills are going to save you, when in actuality, the lack of management skills can actually come back and bite you.
Yep, completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to write down a dividing line on the paper, and you're going to fill in the left side and the right side with things you've done over the last 90 days. On one side, things you've done that would be considered management, and on the other side, things you've done that would be considered leadership. And in general, things that you've done that would be considered management are things that you can quantify on paper. You laid out this strategy. You held somebody accountable by doing this, having this conversation with them. You put this on the calendar as a follow-up, and you did follow up with them. Things where there's evidence of what you did. And on the leadership side, it would be how you made people feel and how you motivated them in a way that isn't necessarily quantifiable in the moment, but only measurable by looking in hindsight and saying, look, it got better because of the things that I did. Fill in that paper as best as you can. And if you're finding that it is weighted more heavily towards one side than the other, then you know where you need work, whether it's on the leadership side or the management side. For most people, one of these two things will come more easily than the other. And for most people, the other one, even if you can do it, it's something that you have to be intentional about doing versus it necessarily being something that is like your go-to or something that happens on its own. So be very cognizant about the fact that both of these things are needed, and you are likely to be better at both because they are definitely both needed equally.
Yeah, I think when this is done right, when you're filling this out and you're writing something in management, there was a strategy that I had, an outcome that we were going after, so I created clear expectations. I pulled together a meeting. I put follow-up dates on the calendar to make sure that we moved this thing from here to here. So like those are manager management behaviors. Then on the leadership side, if you were saying in that same example, when I pulled the team together, I included their opinions. I allowed them to be a part of the work in this space. Like I gave them the space to innovate. Like that's when you know it's feeling good. Like it's a great balance where you're doing both the work that needs to be done and you're making sure that it's to expectation, but then you're doing it in such a way that's bringing your team along through it and with it and including them in the dialogue and the strategy and that type of thing. So like as you're working through these examples, that maybe is what you're looking at or looking for. Or if you're like, man, I didn't do any of that. Mm-hmm. I had an agenda. I set my expectation. I told them to get it done by Friday. And then you're like, okay, right? Then yes, like that's where, how can we sprinkle in a little bit more leadership, inspirational, motivational elements to that type of thing? So I think it's just a good practice overall, because if you find yourself doing example after example and you got a good balance of both, that's probably a great spot. There's probably some really good work that's being done, and it's outputting the way that you want it to output from a good balance.
Right, and not every situation requires both leadership and management. This isn't like you have to do both in every interaction. Some interactions call for one or the other. In fact, most interactions call for one or the other. It's, do you have a nice mix of both when it comes to each person on your team? You have to think about this. A lot of people have switched jobs recently. A lot of people have quit. They have not re-entered the workforce yet, or they've moved around jobs a lot over the last 2 years. It's been called the Great Resignation for a reason. If you think about the reasons people have done that, it's not because their boss was not inspirational enough or that they weren't a visionary. They left because their jobs lacked structure. Their performance wasn't rewarded fairly. They weren't clearly defined. There wasn't growth opportunities. All of these things they fall under the banner of management, not leadership. The things that people leave jobs for, or at least what they've been saying over the last 2 years, are things that would fall more heavily under how an organization is managed versus how it is led. There's plenty of vision out there. There's plenty of of inspiration out there when it comes to a lot of organizations that still have high turnover. And so if you work for an organization where that's part of it, then these are the things you really need to be focusing on right now.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.